I had an initial meeting with Tim, who was an employee of a large global bank who was about to be made redundant. And he had quite a number of concerns, as he'd been with this particular organisation for quite a number of years and was a bit concerned about getting back into the job market. And he was a project manager with this bank. Well, after discussion with Tim, he felt his biggest challenge was going to be around the interview preparation, interview skills, interview technique. He hadn't performed particularly well in interviews, in his opinion, in the past. Hadn't needed to because he had progressed with normal progression internally, but he was concerned about going out into the job marketplace. We then moved on to his LinkedIn profile to ensure that there was an alignment between his full CV and his LinkedIn profile, so that if opportunities presented themselves or through research, they presented themselves and he was contacted through that particular media and then asked to send his CV, that they aligned really. The second phase was really moving into what his job search strategies were going to be. So we looked at the four key ones: networking, recruitment agencies, direct applications and speculative applications. And it was quite clear that when we were in this particular phase of job searching, that his network was largely internally focused. So he needed to work on the development of that network, which was going to take him time, but he was eager, and to get back into the job marketplace, he needed to. So then we looked at what agencies he could work with, what recruiters he could work with, how he would find those, how he would register with those, and actually also how he would use the job search engines to find roles that are advertised through eFinancial Careers, those kind of websites. And finally, the sort of speculative applications, organisations that he was interested in perhaps, or had heard there may be opportunities. But we felt probably the most likely sources for him securing his next role quickly was probably going to be recruitment agencies and probably direct. So we concentrated and focused the level of activity on those two, not ignoring the other ones, but really spending time on those two. Whilst this was going on, we then started to work on the interview skills, and this is where the biggest challenge was, because he felt particularly uncomfortable with competency-based interviews. He was not familiar with the STAR methodology. He was not particularly familiar with the need to produce evidence-based examples. So we started looking at the STAR technique and how that might work for him. The first session I had with him around producing an evidence-based competency example was quite tough. It was an extremely difficult process, and in my view, he would have not performed particularly well at interview, and it would not have been a strong interview at all. My challenge with him was to think about good examples with the situation, the task, the action, and the result. And the only way I really got him to focus on that was to physically write that example out on an A4 sheet of paper, bullet pointing each of the key elements, the S, the T, the A, and the R. And then reading that back to me verbatim to a point where he could eventually turn the bit of paper over and give me a credible example. The first example took him 3 weeks to nail. It was a real weekly meetings, took him 3 weeks. But he was happy with that. I was happy that he would perform a competent answer to that particular competency with the examples he provided. The second challenge was to get him to write out another example, because the interviewers will usually, in competency-based interviews, focus on 4 or 5 key core competencies for that particular role. We knew what those competencies were going to be because he was going to apply for a similar type of role as he had with this large global bank, but in other organisations. So the second challenge was to get him to work on a second competency example. Didn't take quite as long as the first one, 3 weeks, but it still was a lengthy process. And it was quite clear why he felt, after going through this process, why he was so uncomfortable in interviews, because his preparation in the past had been quite poor. He'd had a few knockbacks, but we were slowly making progress. The best bit was the final we got to the third example, and on the third meeting I had with him to discuss this example, he came in beaming ear to ear, and I actually said to him, "You've got a job, haven't you?" And he said, "Yes, I have got a job, and I've used the 2 examples, and that was enough to get me through the interview, and they offered me the job." So actually, we didn't go through the whole process of preparing 5 key core competency examples, because he'd landed after using 2 or 3 good ones. And that was a good end result, because he was delighted, obviously, to get the role and landed a new job. So quite happy.